Good morning, it's Tuesday the 5th of December here in London. This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, taxing times for the top 100. Britain's largest companies get hit with bigger bills from the government.
Qatar's wealth fund is getting set to offload almost half its stake in Barclays.
And Saudi's energy minister tells us oil supply cuts could continue past March.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Britain's largest 100 companies are paying 7% more in tax than they were last year, accounting for a tenth of all of the government's receipts. Bloomberg's Ewan Potts has more.
Higher staff wages, health and social care charges and a windfall tax all add up to a £90 billion bill for the UK's top 100 companies. The numbers come from the 100 Group, a collection of the UK's biggest public and private companies. At a time when both parties want to drive GDP growth, investment by the group shrank by 2% as taxes went up. Labour leader Keir Starmer says the situation demands an economic rethink.
Inflation, debt, taxes are now huge constraints. Never before has a British government asked its people to pay so much for so little.
But Starmer says that anyone who expects a Labour government to quickly turn on the spending taps will be disappointed. In London, Ewan Potts, Bloomberg Radio.
Now, Qatar's sovereign wealth fund is selling nearly half of its shares in Barclays. The sale is expected to raise £500 million for the Middle Eastern state. As one of Barclays' largest shareholders, the Qatar Investment Authority sale comes ahead of a planned revamp of the bank next year.
Turning next to the Barclay family regaining ownership of the Telegraph newspaper after an Abu Dhabi-backed fund helped pay off its £1.2 billion debt to Lloyds. The lender first seized both the Telegraph and the Spectator magazine in June following years of negotiations with the Barclay family. The repayment means Lloyds could be in line for a windfall of about £500 million after the bank wrote off the majority of the debt years ago.
Now, to other UK news, the Home Secretary James Cleverly says that people coming to live in Britain will need to show a £38,000 salary. He hopes that the new plan will dampen Britain's highest net migration figures on record.
This package of measures, taken in addition with the measures on student dependence that we have already announced in May, means that around 300,000 fewer people will be eligible to come to the UK than were coming last year. This is the largest reduction on record.
The new Home Secretary's policy comes as Conservatives fear reaching the next election without delivering on their pledge to reduce migrant numbers. It's the second time this year that the government has unveiled a new 5-point plan to tackle the issue.
Israel's military is pushing into southern Gaza after a truce with Hamas collapsed. IDF spokesman John Conrincus urged civilians who fled south to evacuate once again.
The responsibility for this is on Hamas. If Hamas were to fight outside of the urban area, I don't think that there would be a single Palestinian wounded or killed. The fact that there are Palestinian civilians killed is because Hamas is embedding itself within the civilian population.
Conrincus' comments come as US officials grow increasingly vocal about their fears around the death toll in Gaza. Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin said Israel risks strategic defeat if it fails to heed warnings about the mounting casualties.
Now, the global oil market should be prepared for a sustained cut in supply, according to Saudi's energy minister. Speaking in an exclusive interview with Bloomberg, Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman said that curbs will be delivered in full and may even be extended.
Even the world economy storyline is not as bad as people are seeing it. But we want to make sure, again, this precautionary approach, which a lot of people are having a problem with me on this issue of being precautious. I'm not a gambler as a person. This country does not get into gambling business. We are known for being cautious and precautious simply because we have to make sure that whatever we do is something that has its own contingencies.
Prince Abdulaziz also emphasised that while he couldn't convince his Russian counterpart to cut output, there is a high level of trust and cooperation between Riyadh and Moscow on oil policy. Bloomberg understands that Vladimir Putin will visit Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates this week for a rare overseas trip. It's also reported that the Russian leader will meet with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Now, in a moment, we'll bring you more from our exclusive interview with the Saudi Arabia Energy Minister, Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman, of course, as we are talking about COP28 ongoing in Dubai. But another story caught my eye this morning. Did you see this? I'm not, I must say, particularly a footy fan, but the numbers are eye-watering. The Premier League has sold 4 years of UK broadcast rights. Do you want to know how much for?
A lot.
£6.7 billion. They've sold them to Sky and TNT. So this is the seasons 2025 to 28. So it's 3 years of matches. Apparently there are more matches that you can watch, but it's an enormous amount of money that has increased, of course, versus the last round.
Yeah, look, it's a fascinating illustration of where the money goes in media markets at the moment, especially who didn't bid this time around. So Amazon, for example, got a package of 20 matches the last time around. They weren't in this bid. They said they didn't want to bid for the volume of games that were on offer, according to sources speaking to Bloomberg. But the amount of money for these rights packages keeps going up and up. The Premier League says it's the largest sports media rights package ever sold in the UK, because they basically made the package bigger that you can buy this time around as well. And it's a contrast to what we're seeing elsewhere. The rights packages sold in Italy, for example, they were sold for less than $1 billion for the Serie A matches there. In France, they actually asked for a resubmission of bids from bidders because the first round of offers from broadcasters didn't satisfy the league.
Yeah, but then also the Premier League does appear to be unique in terms of what it offers sort of globally to viewers. If you are a football fan, it just seems to be indispensable, you know, according to the footy fans out there. Anyway, that story caught our eye this morning. But then also let's turn to another one, again on the UK this morning.
Yeah, the UK's largest companies emphasising the pressure they're under from the record burden of taxation here in the UK. The 100 Group, which represents a collection of the UK's biggest public and private companies, says investment by these firms has also gone down. So high tax is a big issue for the government. So too is immigration. Sunak's government announcing they're tightening the rules around visas applying to live in the UK. Our UK correspondent Lizzie Burden joins us now to talk about all these stories. Let's start with this tax story first, Lizzie. The tax take attracting more investment to the UK. These latest figures may make for difficult reading, not only for the businesses involved, but for government too.
Yeah, these figures show that Britain's 100 biggest companies saw their tax bill rise 7.25% in the past year. So it's a total of £90 billion. It accounts for a tenth of all the government's tax receipts. And the amount of complaining, I have to say, on Twitter about Britain's tax burden is becoming a nightmare for my social media alerts, it has to be said. But the Chancellor would point to his move in the autumn statement to make full expensing on capital investment permanent, what he called the biggest tax cut for business in history. And the Prime Minister, of course, would point to the Global Investment Summit last week, when you had all these big names of business jetting into the UK, making investment commitments, the likes of Blackstone's Steve Schwarzman. So they would say that this isn't a problem. But of course, attracting investment isn't just about tax, it's also about stability. So many of the business leaders that I speak to are cozying up to the opposition, because at least the polls suggest that the next government is going to be led by Labour, which puts the question for the shadow Chancellor how she's going to fund the spending plans that her colleagues keep making and maintain the tax cuts that the Chancellor's already announced without adding to borrowing to an extent that it rocks the bond market. Is she going to try to raise wealth taxes, for example? Labour's already referred to people with the broadest shoulders carrying the biggest load, and yet separate analysis by the Wealth Club, this high net worth investment service, found that 100,000 wealthy individuals only paid £55 billion of all income and capital gains tax, so about a quarter of the total. And therefore the Wealth Club says it's an absolute myth that wealthy individuals aren't already paying their fair share of tax.
Yeah, I thought that analysis was really eye-catching. You know, the top 100 individuals also paying a huge share in terms of the Treasury's coffers. So then the government under pressure in terms of the tax burden, also under significant pressure because of migration. We had the net migration numbers, you know, which are official figures, just an estimate, but the numbers got a lot of attention last week. 672,000 more people moving to the UK than leaving. So this is also at the heart of what government is trying to do.
Yeah, and crucially within those numbers, the vast majority of migrants aren't coming from the EU. EU nationals are actually net emigrants emigrating post-Brexit. But as you say, we've had this new announcement from the new Home Secretary, James Cleverly, in Parliament yesterday, including raising the salary threshold for work visa entrants and stopping health and social care workers from bringing dependents, as it has already for students. So clearly the idea is to reduce the number of non-working immigrants. And he says the aim is to reduce annual net immigration by 300,000 in future years, his phrase. So not setting out a precise timetable. And Labour last week said that it wanted 200,000 net immigration. So it looks like Labour actually has a stricter immigration policy than the Conservatives. Now, there's been a backlash already. Unison, the union, says that it's cruel, this plan. It's going to spell disaster for health and social care. And of course, the health service already has staff shortages. But in fact, there's also the converse worry that these new rules are going to trigger a dash to enter the UK before they kick in spring. So it could be a real headache.
So those are changes to legal migration. Meanwhile, we're also watching for the next steps on the government's Rwanda deportation plan. That's for illegal immigrants into the UK. What's the government's next steps we're watching for, Lizzie?
Exactly. This had really been the focus until those new migration figures came out. But the government said that it's close to agreeing a deportation treaty. You'll remember the Supreme Court rejected the original plan. So Sunak at the moment has to thread the needle between, on the one hand, placating the hardline Tories who want him to ignore the Supreme Court's ruling, disapply Britain's commitments under international pacts like the European Convention on Human Rights, and then on the other hand, those who point out that that convention underpins the Good Friday Agreement, which of course helped to end the decades of violence in Northern Ireland. So this is the situation for the government. And meanwhile, Rwanda basically saying there's nothing to worry about. Rwanda's safe, and this criticism is hypocritical.
Lizzie, thank you so much. Bloomberg's UK correspondent, Lizzie Burden.
Let's bring you more now of our exclusive interview with Saudi Arabia's Energy Minister. Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman says the OPEC Plus production cuts agreed last week can absolutely continue past the first quarter if needed. This as the alliance announced a reduction in supply of more than 2 million barrels a day, but failed to move oil prices significantly. The minister has been speaking to Bloomberg's Will Kennedy in Riyadh.
Each of the individual statements, including the aggregated statement that came up were out of OPEC Secretariat, which is like a news item, expressed in details each and everybody commitment to do that thing, which is that we should phase it out, and we all subjugated it to market condition.
Saudi Arabia is at 9 million barrels a day. That's quite low by historical standards. If other people came with you, would you be willing to go lower still, or is this the most that Saudi Arabia can do?
Collective decisions to be made by all of us, upward or downward, is something that we always went for.
But Saudi Arabia wouldn't go lower than 9 billion barrels on its own?
We are not envisaging that they need. Actually, we are hoping, and this is one of the things that I beg to differ with the pundits or so-called pseudo-experts of saying that there is no growth in demand. We see physical growth in demand. We see things that are improving. Even the world economy storyline is not as bad as people are seeing it. But we want to make sure, again, this precautionary approach, which a lot of people are having a problem with me on this issue of being precautious. I'm not a gambler as a person. This country does not get into gambling business. We are known for being cautious and precautious simply because we have to make sure that whatever we do is something that has its own contingencies. Even in our budgetary exercises, we go for lower numbers, we go for lower protection levels, we go for all of the above, just to make sure that we can continue progressing, attending to our vision.
You're not selling any oil to the US. That's an unusual, very little oil to the US. That's a very unusual position for Saudi Arabia.
No, it has been coming down as a result of what is happening with the shale revolution. It's a welcome revolution. It's a welcome thing. Actually, we're using the same technologies now in Jafurah when it comes to shale gas. Actually, we're improving it. To be honest, I owe it to Aramco. So, a thriving oil hydrocarbon industry is something we believe is the right thing for the world. Now, if others don't like that at all, So I'd ask these countries, I'm not naming names, but it's their choice. If they see that we should phase out and phase down hydrocarbon or hydrocarbon, I don't care about fossil fuel, I care about hydrocarbon. If they do, please, I did once in the FII, just the last FII, I said, please, those countries who really believe on phasing out and phasing down hydrocarbons, you should come out and put together a plan for how, starting 1st of January 2024, when are they going to freeze? Well, they should at least freeze their production by January 24, and also put together a plan for when that descendance or phasing out will happen.
You mentioned this phase out, 500 miles from here in Dubai. Many thousands of people are doing the annual climate summit, and one of the issues there is this language which we discussed actually last year about whether that text, agreed to by almost every country in the world, should say fossil fuels should be phased down. Are you happy to have that language in the text this time?
Absolutely not. And I assure you, not a single person in that, well, I'm talking about government, do believe in that. But if they believe in it, I would like to put that challenge for all of those who believe, who comes out publicly by saying we have to do that. Please give me their name and numbers and look at it. Well, I'll give you their name and number, call them and ask them how they are going to execute that effective January 24. If they believe that this is the highest moral ground issue, fantastic. Let them do that themselves, and we will see how much they can deliver, if they can deliver.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.